A festive day in New Orleans takes a tragic turn when a devastating explosion occurs on a ferry carrying U.S. Navy officials and their families. Though some managed to jump into the river to save themselves, the blast claims the lives of 543 passengers. ATF Special Agent Doug Carlin arrives on the scene and finds burnt plastic and wires along the riverbank, leading him to request surveillance footage from the area. Following his instincts, he investigates further, which brings him to the Crescent City Bridge, where he meets FBI agent Paul Pryor. Together, they deduce that the explosive used was likely ANFO, a water-soluble ammonium nitrate. With evidence pointing to foul play, Doug reports his findings and heads back to the office. Doug teams up with his colleague Donnelly to review the footage. He tries to contact his partner, ATF Special Agent Larry Minuti, but only reaches his voicemail. While calling back an anonymous lead, Doug notices a suspicious man on the bridge right before the explosion. Meanwhile, Special Agent Jack McCready informs the press that the blast was a deliberate act of terrorism. Doug then receives a tip about a body found in the river shortly before the explosion. Upon examining the victim, Claire Kuchever, Doug finds duct tape residue on her mouth and a missing earring. Donnelly informs him that Claire had been reported missing. Doug visits Claire's father, who was expecting her to pick him up from the airport that morning. From him, Doug learns about her ex-fiancé, Alan, and gets the keys to her apartment. While going through her home, Doug hears his own voice on her answering machine and realizes that she was the one who had left the message for him just before the explosion. Doug reports his findings to McCready, noting fuel burns on Claire's body and traces of PETN, an explosive used by domestic terrorists. Her severed fingers, however, suggest she died 2 hours before the explosion, leading Doug to theorize that she was abducted and killed to make it appear she was among the blast victims. Doug believes Claire's missing van may have been used in the explosion, and he learns she had called the ATF office that morning. He then notices Larry's car among those of the blast victims. Later, Paul offers Doug a position in a new investigative unit looking into the ferry bombing, which Doug accepts. The team is led by Dr. Alexander Denny, who introduces Doug to a surveillance program called Snow White, which reconstructs past events using satellite data. However, the footage can only be viewed once, and it takes 4 days and 6 hours for it to process. Doug suggests they investigate Claire's home using the Snow White system. As they watch, Doug uncovers clues, including a conversation between Claire and Alan about selling her van. Doug suspects Claire might sense the team's presence, but Paul reassures him that it's impossible. At Claire's funeral, Doug notices Alan is absent, but suspects the bomber might have attended. The team continues to monitor surveillance, eventually identifying the bomber as the man who called Claire about her van. Doug requests a recording of the call for voice analysis, but they discover the call was made from a phone booth outside Snow White's range. Using facial recognition on the bomber's bag, Doug matches it to footage from the ferry dock 2 nights before the explosion. The team waits until Snow White can reveal the bomber's identity. While observing Claire's apartment, Doug has a sudden impulse to shine a laser onto the screen, causing Claire to notice it in real time. The team is forced to explain that Snow White can fold space to link 2 points in time, effectively allowing them to see into the past. Doug convinces the team to send an anonymous tip to his past self with details about the bomber. However, past Doug misses the message, and Larry finds it instead. Larry follows the tip and confronts the bomber at the dock, only to be fatally shot. The bomber then escapes beyond Snow White's range. Determined to save Larry, Doug uses special goggles to follow the bomber, catching up with the past while still in the present. After a crash, the goggles stop working, but Doug continues to pursue the bomber to a hideout. He discovers remnants of the past, but the team witnesses Larry being shot and burned in real time. At the hideout, Doug finds Claire's missing earring among the debris. The bomber is identified as Carol Orstad, who confesses his motives during an interrogation. Rejected from military service for being unstable, Carol saw himself as a patriot and launched the attack to retaliate against the government. He admits to killing both Larry and Claire, though he claims he showed Larry mercy by shooting him first, while Claire was left to die more brutally to conceal the truth. Despite securing a confession, Doug feels no satisfaction, as they couldn't change the tragic outcome. Paul tries to console Doug, reminding him they caught the culprit, but Doug remains troubled by Claire's death. Desperate, Doug persuades Alexander to send him back in time to prevent the bombing. Though Snow White was never intended for time travel, Alexander successfully sends Doug to the morning of the explosion. Waking up in a hospital, Doug escapes, steals an ambulance, and heads to Carol's hideout. He arrives just as Carol is about to kill Claire. After a fight, Doug saves her and prevents her from losing her fingers. He then tells Claire about the impending Ferry attack. At her apartment, Doug leaves a message for his past self, warning him to save Claire. Though Claire is skeptical, she begins to trust Doug. Doug and Claire go to the ferry dock, where Doug plans to defuse the bomb himself. As the ferry departs, Carol boards at the last moment. Claire jumps onto the ferry to help Doug, even though he asked her to stay behind. Doug confronts Carol and, after a tense battle, kills him. Realizing there's no time to stop the bomb, Doug drives the van into the river, allowing Claire to escape. Doug, however, is trapped and dies in the explosion. Claire, heartbroken, watches the rescue efforts. As she grieves Doug's sacrifice, she is shocked to see the present-day version of Doug arrive at the dock. This time, Claire knows everything, but Doug only feels a vague sense of déjà vu.
Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more movie recaps.